Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is my utmost pleasure under the PPP Civic-led government to present my contribution to the 2022 budget debate. First of all, I wish to congratulate the Senior Minister Senior Minister of Finance within the Office of the President with responsibility for finance, Dr. Ashley Singh, and his dedicated team for the thorough work done leading to the successful presentation of Budget 2022, the largest budget in Guyana, intended to benefit every Guyanese across our beautiful nation. A budget which will continue to strengthen the PPP civic efforts since we arrived back at the helm of leadership of this country, and a budget that will position our nation to build a prosperous Guyana. Mr. Speaker, the budget theme is appropriate, steadfast against all challenges, resolute in building our one Guyana. The PPP civic-led government continues to display resilience against all challenges, evidenced by a tough response to every action which seeks to undermine the democratic culture and norms required for a safe and secure future for our people. Recalling, Mr. Speaker, the PPP Civic collaborated with the smaller political parties and the majority of the electorate in a coordinated joint action in defense of democracy, in defense of the rule of law, and in defense of barefaced rigging of the elections. Mr. Speaker, it is this government who now leads our beautiful country, taking a tough stand for over 5 months in 2020 to wrestle away victory which the APNU AFC was unwilling to relinquish amidst the court's ruling, in full view of respected CARICOM leaders and the international community, all of whom were fully convinced that the PPP Civic was the rightful winner of the March 2nd, 2020 elections. Mr. Speaker, so I want to say to the presenter before me that the PPP Civic was not an installed government. It is an elected government by the electorate of this country. It was the APNU AFC, of which GAP is associated with, which held tight a victory that they thought that they were going to keep forever. Mr. Speaker, it is laughable as you sit and listen to the debate contribution of the honorable members on the APNU AFC side, in which they describe the budget, and only yesterday it was described as deceitful and disrespectful and not people-centered. They leveled criticism by labeling the PPP Civic government as a corrupt government, when in fact the shoe is on the other foot. As not so long ago, the APNU AFC presided over a failed state. And I say again, a failed state, a failed economy, a failed education sector, a failed agricultural sector, a failed attempt to address holistically the COVID-19 pandemic and failed to ensure the security and prosperity of the Guyanese population. And Mr. Speaker, that is why the APNU AFC sits in the opposition, because they have failed to convince the electorate that they are good quality leaders and that they deserve to lead this country. But the electorate had all the evidences, and what did they do? They voted honorable members out of office. Mr. Speaker, in less than 16 months, I just want to remind this House that the APNU AFC was in office after 2015. And less than 16 months, there were a whole host, a long list of corrupt cases that were exposed. I will just mention a few which comes to mind. The drug bond, do you all remember that? The drug bond scandal, where even the parliamentary members or parliamentarians had to suspend Parliament to go down to the drug bond to examine what was actually in that bond. Unbelievable. What did they find? They found that the issue was they were storing unserviceable medical equipment in there, and not what they had said to the Honorable House, that they were storing medical supplies and drugs, medical drugs for the nation. In fact, one of my colleagues has just mentioned, in addition to the unserviceable pieces of equipment found there, they were storing boxes of expired condoms. Shame. Mr. Speaker, and then...
Honorable Member, the use of shame, and Honorable Member Mr. Maipal, I hear you shouting lie, lie across the room. I'll find the record.
My apologies to the House, Mr. Speaker. I withdraw the word shame. Just to remind them again that the Durban Park project, one of the biggest scandals in 2016, no accountability on private donation to that project, a non-disclosure of the spendings of the company that was in charge of ensuring the construction was going apace. Mr. Speaker, the amount of money expended on one of the APNU AFC most ugliest legacy in this country was 1.5 billion Guyana dollars, which we had to force out of them during parliamentary debate to disclose. However, that is not the true cost of the stadium, well, the ugliest stadium that we have in this country, but the scandal surrounding there is recent in the minds of all Guyanese, and living, and the evidence is every day in the face of this nation. Mr. Speaker, the new Demerara Harbor Bridge, that study too was a big scandal, and I say no more. So this allegation, this trying to taint the PPP civic government as a corrupt government, should once and for all be laid to rest. Because as far as we know, that this is not the maximum or the expansive number of scandals that were exposed. These are just a few to remind those on the opposite side that when they bark, we can bark back as hard and harder than they. Mr. Speaker, and they want to hear more, but we can also talk about the COVID-19 hospital at Lillian Dal. That too was an enormous scandal just recently. And Guyanese people are not short-minded. They will remember, Mr. Speaker, the inability of the APNU AFC to execute projects was a complete disaster. And they tend to want to criticize the budget. It was a complete disaster. They were a government of park relic projects. In the past, when it was the PNC, it was white elephants. Now it is parked projects. Mr. Speaker, just to remind them, they parked the deep water project. The PPP Civic will do it. Mr. Speaker, they parked the Amalia Falls project that was just being criticized here in this House. The PPP Civic will look, examine, and I can assure you we will address that too. They parked the Linden to Lethem Road project. This PPP Civic government will establish that road for that critical link that will ensure that it contributes to the development and the prosperity of this nation. They parked the Kurpakari Bridge project. I remember sitting 4 budget speeches when we were in office before 2015 and 5 budget debates during the APNU AFC period in 2015 to 2020. And the former Minister of Indigenous Peoples Affairs in every single budget speech said that his government was going to build the Kurpakari Crossing Bridge. Today, I want to assure you that it will be the PPP Civic government who will remain in office for a very long time that will realize that project. Mr. Speaker, another park project. The Specialty Hospital was another park project. We will assure you that this budget is laying the foundation to bring to this nation state-of-the-art medical facility that will maybe even rival future specialty hospitals. It will be done by the PPP Civic. Mr. Speaker, another park project was the Amerindian land titling project. That project was parked. The former, Mr. Speaker, not a single land title was approved by the APNU AFC government in 5 years. Sitting at the helm of government, did not approve a single piece of land to be allocated as an extension for villages who have applied. Mr. Speaker, it will be the PPP Civic government that will take that park project and make it into reality and once and for all deal with land matters for the indigenous people. We have a track record of doing that, and we just have been in office for 1 year and a couple of months, and we have re-established the ALT project unit, and we have already approved Kapui's extension, and their title will be handed out shortly. Mr. Speaker, and beyond that, they sat there doing nothing for 5 years. And in 1 year, the PPP Civic government has demarcated 5 Amerindian villages. Mr. Speaker, 5. You could have done 1 every year, and we would have matched up and equalized. But you sat there doing nothing and has the gall to come to this house and speak about our government is not people-centered, that we are not fair, that we discriminate, that we are not doing anything for the Guyanese population. More so, you are moving to tell us that we don't do anything for the indigenous people. Mr. Speaker, the budget is one of Guyana's largest budgets. It will not be only one. Bigger budgets will come, I can expect. But Mr. Speaker, this budget is a budget that provides a platform, it provides a foundation for the improvement of all sectors in this country. And improving every sector is ensuring that the Guyanese people can rest assured that their security, their livelihoods, that their lives will be taken care by this government. It is setting the foundation. And I want to say to you on the other side, you better get your act in order to contribute to development and not to continue to attempt to destroy this country. It is too beautiful. Mr. Speaker, I now want to turn to the Amerindian Development Fund. Mr. Speaker, our government has provided to this fund a total of $1,880 billion. Mr. Speaker, let me correct myself before I am quoted. We are allocating a total of $1,835 million towards the Amerindian Development Fund. Mr. Speaker, I want to say clearly that assertions were made by the speaker before me. He even quoted from the Auditor General's report. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell this House, I do not have the Auditor General report before me, but I could recall reading it, and I could recall reading in the media that the APNU AFC, Indigenous Peoples Ministry, could not account in 1 year for the entire Amerindian Development Fund, and a figure was printed. Mr. President, I'm saying I don't have the book before me, but I read it, and I read it in the media, and I spoke about it in previous budget debate when I held the evidence up, and I provided the evidence then. Mr. Speaker, more than $860+ million could not be accounted for by the then government and the ministry that was responsible for Indigenous people. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that under the Amerindian Development Fund, we can expect a number of things that will remedy the neglect and remedy the marginalization and remedy the fact that we are delivering, that we are now delivering in a period when in the past 5 years there was no delivery. And if you want, Mr. Speaker, I can give you one single example. For 3 years under the APNU AFC, no school uniform was delivered to the hinterland students. None whatsoever. I was campaigning in Paramakatoy when an aircraft landed, and if you see bolts of cloth, bolts of uniform materials coming for the first time just about 4 days before elections. That is how they treated Indigenous students. And you can have leaders from the other side of this House under the APNU AFC coalition speaking about the PPP civic government don't care for the Guyanese people or care for the Indigenous people. Mr. Speaker, that is a fact. I saw it with my own eyes. The officers who deliver it probably were so ashamed they didn't even want to acknowledge Pauline Sukhai at that time. I'm telling you, it happened right before my eyes. So I can speak about it because I felt it for the Amerindian students who I was campaigning, working among for so many years, 5 years, and they did not receive school uniform. I want to say that the PPP civic government did not only deliver, but now we have increased it two times fold. They are getting $5,000 as an assistance for school uniform, including the Because We Care grant, which is now moved to $25,000. And let me again correct the perception that the earlier speaker held, that we were expecting to pay $50,000 per student. He needs to go back to read our manifesto, and he needs to go back to the time when we were campaigning, because there's lots of writings about it. We said that in our first term, at the end of our first term, children registered in the school system will receive a total of $50,000. Mr. Speaker, agricultural support for Amerindians. We agree that Amerindians are the breadbasket in their own villages. They depend a lot on agriculture. But I can assure you that in this budget, agricultural support from the Ministry of Agriculture will be forthcoming. And in fact, in 1 year of our government, they have been able to provide funding for a number of Amerindian communities throughout the hinterland to augment and strengthen their capacity to cultivate and to grow more food. The Amerindian Affairs Ministry has also complemented those support from the Ministry of Agriculture. And we have delivered to Amerindian communities 112 tractors, complete with trailers. And we are in the process of completing the delivery of the implements to those areas that are logistically difficult to meet in a short period. Mr. Speaker, there was no time in Guyana's history that the Amerindian people have received such staunch and strong support for agriculture. Mr. Speaker, those tractors will be increased in number to another 71 this year, whereby other communities who are eagerly awaiting their allocation will have their allocation delivered before the end of 2022. That piece of machinery, Mr. Speaker, is multi-purpose. They can use it for a number of activities. They can use it in the forestry because they are engaged in forest production. They can use it for transportation, where they are taking bulk materials and supplies to their village. They can use it for maintaining roads, etc. Mr. Speaker, that is the vision of our country, where we will give substantive support, make substantive intervention to the Amerindian villages so that they too can be able to progress and increase their opportunities of having a better life. Mr. Speaker, economic projects. Our government continue to provide presidential grants to Amerindian communities. 300 million will be provided this year, and an additional 25 million will add to looking at economic and productive projects in those communities. Mr. Speaker, let me give you the scenario of the 5 years on the APNU AFC as it relates to the Presidential Grant Fund. The first year, did you know what they did? They took away that grant and termed it a Jubilee grant, and told the villagers that they have to spend this Jubilee grant to celebrate. Mr. Speaker, the only Jubilee grant project that I have seen is in Kako. They have made a little park and they have their Jubilee Park. That is the only evidence. Mr. Speaker, in the 5 years, they allowed villages to put away or to lose the presidential grant and send it back to Consult Fund. Mr. Speaker, if they had any interest in the development of Amerindians, they would have done better to ensure that the total sum allocated under the presidential grant every year of their tenure in office for those 5 years, that those funds should have reached the fund or the village fund to do projects and to benefit the people. Mr. Speaker, I've heard umpteen times in this house they speak about the Granger 5Bs as if the hinterland or the hinterland communities benefited from those 5Bs. In fact, there are numerous, in fact, almost every single Amerindian community in the hinterland, 1, 7, 8, and 9 regions, have not benefited from the Granger Bs. In fact, when we go to communities during their time, they said all they got was a stung from a bee. They didn't get anything. I was at a village called Kumu, the satellite of St. Ignatius, right in the village, in the region where the Honorable Duncan come from. And there, they were excited to receive the Granger bicycles. And when they turned up with their parents, they were told, no, you can't get it. It came for special assigned students. And those children from Kumu who comes to the St. Ignatius Primary School continue to walk. Mr. Speaker, I will tell you, it is under the PPP civic government that the service and the distribution of modes of transport, both water and land, began. And the David Granger G never had an impact in the hinterland. Likewise, they spoke about the school feeding program. If they are truthful, they will know that that school feeding program started under the PPP civic government. And what the statistics that was given by the Honorable Minister of Education yesterday tells a story that their support for the school feeding program was concentrated in specific regions on the coast and not in large amounts, but in a handful of areas. And she listed the areas and the region in which, coastal region in which their school feeding program was established. Mr. Speaker, I also want to speak and put to rest this issue again about the CSOs. Mr. Speaker, the CSO program began under the PPP civic government, and we are very proud of it. And we were very disappointed when the APNU AFC unceremoniously disbanded that program. They disbanded it and they took away from young Amerindians, both male and female, income that was so useful. Mr. Speaker, I want to say, because my time is short, I want to say that we are proud to be back, to have been elected in the majority by the Amerindian electorate, and that we have fulfilled our manifesto promises to them by re-establishing the CSO program, where today this budget is providing $1.05 billion in the pockets of young people. Mr. Speaker, and that $1 billion and $50 million is not going to remain in paper form in the pocket, but it will be circulated in the villages. The entrepreneurs, village entrepreneurs will benefit, and it will stimulate development as it relates to economic ventures, and business will once more begin to survive in those communities. Mr. Speaker, I also want to speak about land titling. I know I said a word, but I wanted to assure this House that under the budget we will have 15 villages titled, and we will have 20 villages demarcated in the year 2022. Imagine comparing this to 5 years where nothing was done.
Honorable Member, 5 is a good number to introduce someone to ask you for 5 minutes to conclude.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the honorable member give him 5 minutes to conclude our presentation.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Honorable Minister, you have 5 minutes to continue and conclude.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn my attention now to the region that I have some responsibility for as an MP. I want to say that over the last 5 years, we've been championing support for that region, and there was none forthcoming. There are very many sad stories in Region 8, particularly in the North Pacaraimans. And I continue as a Member of Parliament to challenge the terrain and also to bring hope to those communities. And all those communities will be treated in similar fashion as any other community across this country under the budget. They will receive presidential grant, they receive investment fund, they will receive tractors, they were able to, for once in 5 years, be able to maintain and look after their road with an injection of $100 million last year. And today, they are able to not comfortably, but to be able to use the road in a much more improved state. Mr. Speaker, we have been able to also improve some of the conditions of the schools and the hospital in the last year. In this year, Mr. Speaker, Region 8 will expect the extension of the Cato Secondary School. We will be looking at the Wiper and Sandhills, which is found in the Wiper community, their health center. We have completed in Carisparo the the medical workers' quarters, and also upgraded their health center. In the last year, we have been able to provide safe water supplies to Chiang Mau and some other communities. And in this year, we expect an even more robust attention in terms of water for Region 8. Mr. Speaker, Region 8 also will be seeing improvement in the facilities for health. In fact, at the Parmakatoy, spanking new medical facility, which is referred to as a smart hospital, will be provided to that population. And we will also continue to support the building of bridges over Monkey Creek, both at Carisparo and at Kaibarupai. Those are areas that are very difficult to meet. But what I'm demonstrating here, Mr. President, that the APNU AFC government had 5 years to do similar work. And in 1 year, we have been able to bring back comfort and hope to that once forgotten region by the APNU AFC, the former government. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that I heard that we are misleading or we don't tell the facts to the Amerindian people. Mr. Speaker, our government has a track record of engaging the Amerindian people. And one example, or more than one example of that, is our consultative nature as a government. Mr. Speaker, we have consulted on the revision of the Amerindian Act and modernized it in 2016. We have consulted on the low carbon development strategy. We will continue to consult on the low carbon development strategy for 2030. And of course, we will also begin the process to examine rights issues for Amerindians. We have 4 more years, or 3.5 more, or 4 more years in this term, and I can tell you, you will expect even more from this government. And we expect that we will be in here for a long time, Mr. Speaker, as a government, and I hope that all of us will be around to see this budget and all the other budget coming from the PPP civic government that will lead Guyana into a prosperous state. And I therefore commend Dr. Ashley Singh, Honorable Minister of Finance, and his team, and our government for being a bold, aggressive, effective, and impactful government to the people of this nation. Thank you.